Hey Nick, happy Sunday. Thanks for your words of wisdom about our food bodies and how they exist in the world in a pretty simple way. And if we wanted to say go on a diet, it wouldn't or shouldn't be that complicated. Um, we are the food that we eat. So if you want to change the shape of your body, pay attention to the things that you put into it. Uh, because like you said, science has told us that the body is made of these organic elements. Carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, other stuff. Science hasn't found anything else, and I guess from one perspective, that's true. If all you're paying attention to is atoms, but what distinguishes life from inorganic matter um, is that these same elements that were inorganic have now organized themselves into something um, more complex, something which exists on a different level, which is a different way of being in the world. And so science wants to explain life. It's got to um, talk about more than just atoms. It's got to talk about molecules, which are themselves an emergent level of organization of atoms. Um, and it's got to talk about whole cells made of, trillions of molecules, tens of trillions of molecules that maintain themselves and that complexify. You know, the basic property of life isn't just taking in food and getting bigger. It's selectively taking in food and selectively internally using that food to orchestrate a particular body plan. Um, we take in food from the outside and we disorganize it as we digest it into our stomachs, break it up into its molecular, carbohydrate, amino acid components, and absorb it into our bodies so that we can reorganize it into the various organ systems that make up our physiology. Um, so there's a complex organizational process going on that if you're going to just talk about atoms, you're never going to understand. Yes, atoms are organizing in the body, but the organization is what we're interested in explaining or, scientifically investigating, not the atoms. The atoms, we got it, we know them. But even at the atomic level, though, just to say, they are also self-organizing um, subatomic particles and electricity. Um, Protons, neutrons, and electrons are forced together, but their presence as atoms is still a process that has to continue. They're not just fixed like that. It's kind of a seething entity that's exchanging electrons all the time with its surroundings. Sometimes actually with like an atomic um, chain reaction, atoms are actually splitting each other apart. So atoms aren't just these billiard balls, these pinpricks. Um, they're actually complex living beings in their own right. So to say that the human body is a bunch of molecules, I mean, I don't know if you've seen simulations on YouTube, Nick, of what actually goes on inside the nucleus of our cells when all the protein machinery and the RNA and the DNA are exchanging their information, and proteins are being created that go out into the cell, and then they do have a mechanical, a physical role to play. They'll attach to some receptor somewhere and change the cellular architecture in a way that allows some new process to take place, and all kinds of complex feedback loops and self-regulating systems develop out of these little protein shapes. Um, but see, there's still a systemic organization to what these shapes of protein are doing in the body that you can't understand by just looking at the proteins. So then you've got to zoom out again and see that there's the whole body with its drives and its desires and its hunger, not only for food or sex, but for understanding. There's that desire in the human being, the human animal as well. Um, and so, if you want to talk about life in general, we certainly must include the food body, but life is um, a bit more than that. We're never going to be satisfied as human beings with a supposed explanation of the body of our lives in terms of atoms, right? I mean, I don't think even if it were true, which as I said, it's true in the sense that that's a perspective in which to take upon the body. It is made of atoms, but what's interesting about the body is how the atoms are, interacting with one another and producing something new, a new whole. Atoms aren't the only wholes in the sense of self-organizing bodies uh, in the universe. They become larger wholes. They become molecules and cells, multicellular organisms, human beings, civilizations, um, Gaian planetary ecosystems. Um, all of those are real bodies just as much as atoms are real bodies, but bodies live inside of each other and um, become new bodies. You know, the reason I sometimes agree and sometimes disagree with all of your talk about the I, the me, the ego, the conscious free will possessing entity. The reason I sometimes go along with you is because identity is a tricky issue. I don't have my own individual, separate personality, from which to view the world and attempt to defend myself and uh, control what happens. But that doesn't mean there's no sense in which identity really exists. It's just that it's shifty. Sometimes this body is the will that allows a situation to occur. Sometimes that same will, that same identity will be in somebody else, and they'll cause the shift in how all the other people around them are thinking. People are conscious because they can communicate with one another, and so our willpower is always already something that we share, and so identity is part of the game that we play with each other. We throw identity back and forth between all the beings in the world, sometimes letting them be, you know, like us. We allow other beings to be present with us because we grant them the same presence in the world that we have. Um, and so there's this very profound thing that goes on between bodies of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, etc., communicating. Not only because, think about it, the atoms are doing the same thing that you and I and everybody, all the other human beings are doing when we talk. They're bumping into one another, sharing charges. One atom says, "Oh, I don't like you. Get the hell away from me," and another one, finds some friends over there, and they become something, and eventually, all these teams of atoms start to form, and eventually, you've got life, and we keep doing the same thing at our level. Um, I like some things. I talk about those. You like some of what I say. We talk about that. You say something I disagree with. We talk about that. We're just sending positive and negative feedback to one another, and in that way growing. So, that's why I like the metaphor actually of we're a food body. If though you were able to think of food as something my friend Phil has said, ideas themselves are nutrition. They're nutritious, and we feed our minds by sharing meaningful communications with one another on a cultural level. And that we have to pay attention to getting mental, metaphorically speaking, mental exercise as much as physical exercise. And